Hello everyone, welcome to Redmen TV in this special Liverpool library. I'm joined by soon-to-be published author John Machin for this one. John, thanks very much for joining me. I've had the pleasure of reading the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good. Nice.
Which was wicked. I did it in one sitting, to be honest with you. Could have been a bit longer, mate. But, you know, just like George R.R. Martin takes about 15 years a book, I think you've taken about 40.
Yeah, 40, yeah.
Where did it come from?
What, the book or the 40 years?
Oh, the book first, and then how did it get to 40 years?
Well, I'd always written anyway. I'd always written all sorts of things, but I'm not really a great finisher of things. And then there was a competition, and I think it was like a Richard and Judy competition. So I thought, there's a deadline, you know, there's something to aim for. And so I started fiddling around with the two kids. That sounds terrible, doesn't it, fiddling around with the two kids? Someone who worked in child protection all his life. I started with these two kids and just dialogue, and the book became very dialogue heavy. It was about conversations and for these two children, and I tied in all the things. I did what they always say, write what you know. I tied in all the things that I was interested in, which was the welfare of young kids, comics, football, and trophies. I always had a fascination with the FA Cup. That was the driver for the thing, not the World Cup at all. It was the FA Cup that was the driver for me, and the story just sort of flowed from those ingredients, really, and the dialogue that came from the kids.
Well, I wrote down, I didn't know whether I'd use this, but I wrote down what I thought were the big themes of the book. And I had women in football. I had social care was a big thing that I drew out of it as well. Time travel, friendship. And I also had a documentary in, because I think one of the things that I enjoyed about the book is that I was learning something. I felt like I was there at those games that you sort of go into in the story and stuff like that. So for me, that tied into the documentary side of things. But you start writing the book. Why didn't it go anywhere after that?
I sent it off to the competition, which it didn't win, didn't get anywhere. It came back, and I thought, well, I've got a completed book. I'll do what you're supposed to do. I sent a specimen chapter and a synopsis off to a publishing house, and they read that and sent me a letter back saying, yeah, we like that, can you send us the book? So I sent them the book. In the meantime, my brother-in-law died in a climbing accident in France, and just when that sort of hit him, you know, the ramifications from that, the book landed back through the doorstep, through the letterbox, saying, no, we don't really want this one. It's not really for us. Now, at that point, you're supposed to go, well, okay, I know people who sent this out 100 times before they get published. So, but at that point, I didn't have any interest whatsoever in doing that, really, working on that for myself. So I just stuck it in a drawer, really. And I didn't forget about it, but I didn't actively pursue any avenue for it, really.
So obviously, you know, there's a distinct period of time that happens between you writing the book and when Paul picks it up a year or so ago and stuff like that. Did you ever envisage 3 years ago that this would be a thing now?
No, not at all. I mean, I do actually believe it's sort of found its time, if you know what I mean. The book, I think it was ahead of its time. You know, no one really talked about people collecting comics. As you say, no one really talked about women and football, you know, and the notion that football would be that popular, you know, even in them, I was a football fan. I used to go to the match every week. I'd done so all my life. But football wasn't what it is today. I mean, I think the Premiership, whatever you say about it, has even globally sparked the sort of mad interest in football, and I don't think that existed when I wrote the book. And I don't think, things like comics now. I mean, I talked there about going to a comic mart. Well, comic mart was like half a dozen people with a few boxes full of comics trying to flog them. Now they have Comic Cons that last 3 or 4 days with stars from all over the world. I mean, it's big business now. And it wasn't when I wrote it. In that respect, I do think it was ahead of its time. But also possibly one of the reasons why it wasn't when it went to a publisher, they didn't get.
There was no appetite for that type of content.
They didn't think that there was that kind of a market, Yeah.
It's really interesting. Obviously, we can't dive into why the book now exists without speaking about your wife, Annette, obviously.
No.
I've heard Paul say many times over the years, Supermum and all this type of stuff, the glue that holds the family together and stuff. And I don't think it would be an enjoyable topic for you to talk about too much, but if you could give people watching it...
Well, I mean, I think it's the spark, really, that got us where we are now. Paul had read the book when he was about 10. And the way he tells it, he loved the book and he's always had it in his mind. And about 3 years ago, maybe, he said to me, can I have the manuscript and I'll digitize it? But whatever that meant, I didn't know. I said, yeah, go and do what you want. And only really after his mum's diagnosis of having dementia, did it seem, listening to him talk, it sort of spurred him on to want to do something that might help. And basically he wanted to use his skills to do that. And, his skills basically, as we've seen here, are like in PR and in, being up front and being a showman and all that. And he's used that to get this thing going. And we talked about how to get money together to publish it, because I couldn't afford, it would take a few £1,000. I wouldn't, if I had a few £1,000, then I'd go on holiday. I wouldn't be, self-publishing a book, but that's what the path he wanted to go down. And I sort of was grossly embarrassed by a lot of it, because I'm not really one for the limelight as such, and it was a bit difficult for me, to all that stuff being put out on, basically for the world to see, all this dirty washing thing that people tell you, you keep hidden, keep to yourself. But, I mean, I can't fault the way it's gone, the way Paul has developed the whole thing, and the response on Kickstarter has just blown me away.
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, we'll talk maybe a bit more about the Kickstarter stuff later, but I'd love to move on to the story itself then. Now, for anyone who's coming to this first time, hasn't read the Kickstarter, there's a QR code which we flashed up at the start. You can if you literally Google "the man who stole the World Cup, Paul Machin," the Kickstarter is the first thing that will come up. But you can go to that. We'll put the QR code at the end of the video as well. Now, it's about ostensibly it's about two kids. If I'm right in saying a 14-year-old and a nearly 11-year-old, Joe and Andy, from Liverpool. Can you fill us in from there?
Well, I mean, it's never explained in the book how they know each other, but Liverpool kids know each other. They probably were neighbours or had been in the same school. Kids who know each other, and they both have their own desires and ambitions in life. And Andy, I can't remember which way around they are now, so that's how long ago I wrote it.
Andy the Rogue.
And Andy the Rogue is mad about comics and science fiction, and he's a bit of a little geek, and Joe is a tomboy who loves playing football. Claims to be better than anyone, even all the boys at football, which in the 80s was a big deal because, it was still banned, I think, in the 80s in this country. I mean, women playing football. It's just that kind of nonsense that existed for decades. And she had this burning ambition to use her talents to be a footballer. but also she had a love of Liverpool Football Club, because that's obviously, it runs in families, and her dad, she goes to London with her dad and her uncle to watch the semi-final against Southampton, and Andy finds out that she's going, and because he's on the run from having been in care, he's dodged out of care so he can go to London to a comic mart to buy comics. He wants to use her as cover so that he doesn't get picked up as a young kid on his own. And they set off on that little journey to London, and then fall into an adventure with a time warp of some kind. I mean, when I originally wrote the manuscript, I put my own artwork in. It wasn't actually strictly artwork. It was like a copy of the flyer for the comic mart. So it actually was a comic mart in London that I personally thought about going to, but didn't in the end. But that was in the book, and so legitimately, you could see these kids in the 80s go into this comic mart. One reluctantly, and the other one because he was desperate to go to it, and then they fall into, as I say, this time warp and end up on this little adventure, travelling around time. But it's all about football and going to football matches, and and also a bit of comic collecting on the way.
So, I mean, first off, obviously, when I started hanging around with Paul, I remember going into your dining room where you had all your video collection and your comics and all that type of stuff. So that's obviously was a massive part of your youth. We know football's a massive part of not just your youth but your life, same with the comics and stuff. And then the social care element to Andy's character. Obviously that's your working life, am I right in saying?
Yeah.
So why the thing that struck me is I obviously know you've had Paul, and then am I right in saying 8 years later, Lauren, in 1991, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
A boy and a girl. Now, in this story, I found it fascinating to know that you'd written it before Lauren was born. I'm assuming in large before Paul as well. I don't know.
No, I wrote it after Paul was born,
Paul.
But he was only, I don't know, maybe about 3 or 4 or 5.
Where did the elder sort of sister-like character with the young boy come from?
It actually just came from the page. I just started writing a little dialogue, and it just that was it. I had this thing in my head about the little geeky kid, and bouncing around, and all his brain full of all this stuff which she thinks of as nonsense, and it just flowed from that. The first thing I did was, we actually had one of those old BBC computers, because my wife was a teacher. We got a cheap access to BBC computers, and I remember sitting on that and just typing dialogue, and I think I did that even before the competition thing came up. It was just part of a writing process, and of course I work with a lot of kids, and I knew sort of how the dialogue went and stuff like that, and it just flowed from there, really. They just sort of came alive themselves.
Was there a point, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the first 2 chapters for me, and I don't know how recently you've read this, were very dialogue heavy and not a lot of prose around it, and then probably from chapters 3 till 17 it became more of a book. Was it ever a script at any point?
No, but in fact, one of the things Paul has done has filled in between some of the dialogue. He's put a gloss on it. As he said, that if in the book I'd said something about their dress, well, that might not mean a lot to someone now, because it was written in the 80s when people would understand what it meant or what it looked like. They knew it was a contemporary book, so people would, didn't need to be told how people dressed. But now you probably do need to have some kind of idea. So Paul filled in some of that. And so it was very dialogue heavy, the whole book, I thought, when I wrote it. But you're right, the first couple of chapters are very, very dialogue, because it was about those 2 characters and why are they together, and where are they going, what are they doing. And I when I wrote it, it just felt right to me that we get to know them basically through talking to each other and bouncing off each other.
Well, I think when you said before it was sort of ahead of its time, it was definitely something that I thought about as well. And what I think maybe resonated with me from the book was you're writing about a time that I remember as a kid. So when you're talking about the shell suit that Joe is wearing, and the messed up Adidas trainers that Andy's wearing, that brings back memories for me almost. And I actually think that 40 years probably helps for someone like me, is that I want to go back to those times. I think we all inherently want to go back and in some ways relive our youth and stuff as well, don't we?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, for me, it's not going back to the 80s. For you, it is, but for me, it's more the 60s. And so some of that I don't doubt is Paul's little filler in as well. He probably has the same nostalgia as you.
But that almost, it's talked about on the Kickstarter page as the family heirloom. If I'm harking back and Paul's harking back to the 80s, will you hark back to the 60s and the story itself? And you take us to a night in 1965 against Inter Milan that I'm sure you wrote from memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
And what I found really interesting is, having been to Anfield 1,000 times over the years, I've never read about a match from the early doors that I've heard so much about, and yet I got to almost watch it through your eyes in some ways.
Yeah, I mean that for me always stood out. That, I mean, you have to remember we were like 4 years from promotion into the First Division, and to suddenly be playing the European champions in your own ground in a semi-final and absolutely wiping the floor with them. And the atmosphere. I mean, people. I was at all the big games that followed that. San Etienne and Olympia, all of them. Even Barcelona. I've never ever known any experience like that Inter Milan one. It was just incredible. The Kop was totally in full voice. They'd won the FA Cup for the first time ever about 3 or 4 days before. Shankly sent out the 2 injured guys, Jerry Byrne, who broke his collarbone in the final, and Gordon Milne, who'd missed it, sent them out with the cup to run around the ground to stir up the crowd, and the crowd was just incredible. And I've never forgotten it to this day, how it made me feel, just so vibrant and part of it all,
It's a great chapter. It's a great chapter in the book, John, it really is. And then they meander through time, I suppose, might be the way to discuss it. And they meet the man in black, of course, and then from there, how did you find your path through?
I mean, some of it, you have to remember this is post Heysel, and I was very angry about Heysel. Lots of people died for no real reason, and a lot of the blame, most of the blame was put on Liverpool supporters, and there were other people who, didn't take any blame, like UEFA and stuff like that, when maybe they should have taken a lot more. So I was quite angry about that and this notion of hooliganism and all the rest of it, as if it was like a new invention. And so there's stuff in the book about, hooliganism has been around, sporting activities for a long, long time. So, let's dip in and out of some of the history of, the way football's been over time, And I'm not sure I would do that if I wrote it again. I'd take a different path. But it was what was there at the time in the 80s, yeah.
So did you have to do a lot of research? Because was it 1892 it went back to?
Yeah, some of that was
because I remember reading 1892 and thinking, hang on, where's this going?
Some of that was microfiche in the Liverpool library, going through all his old newspapers and stuff. Interesting, really, really fascinating stuff.
Because I was thinking, that's not writing what you know.
But someone someone said to me once, a friend who read it very early on, said to me, "Oh, you had all these matches," and I went, "How old do you think I am?" But yeah, it was a lot of research, really. Fascinating stuff. I mean, the history of football is amazing. If you go and look it up and you see all the things that went on and how it's changed over the years, fascinating.
So what when you I'm trying to sort of traverse through this without giving
without
everything
giving
away.
Everything away. Yeah,
because we want you to back the project, of course, if you watch it and listening. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully now, but when it comes to the women in football aspect of it, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because as you say, there was no professional football for women for a long time. Why was that important to you to write about in this? Because it's a massive theme throughout the book.
Yeah. In fact, probably should have been more, if the truth be known. I think Joe's character sort of takes a little bit of a back seat as the story goes on, which, maybe would have been rectified in subsequent chapters of it, But I don't really know. I was very, very aware of some aspects of women's football. I was very aware of the Dick Kerr ladies' history, which was a very famous women's football team who beat everyone in sight in, I don't know if it was the 20s or 30s. They were absolutely brilliant with some brilliant footballers. And then they just got banned. And the FA just banned all women from playing football. And it just seemed like such an injustice that people couldn't play football. And, they weren't by then, and it says it in the book, I think, that on the continent in Europe, they were playing football, and they did have, proper professional women's teams, who made a living out of playing football. But in this country, they were just not allowed to play for decades. It was just monstrous.
And I think that, maybe this was all to do with the Euros and stuff from a few years ago, but I do remember hearing at the time that, attendances was just as big for women's games back in the day as they were for the men's games.
They were massive, yeah. I mean, it wasn't just women's games. You could have schoolboy games which had 30, 40,000 people
Really?
turn up to watch them, yeah. It's crazy. But, yeah, women had massive crowds watching them, and the standard of football, by all accounts, obviously, there's no way of knowing, really, because no one was filming them particularly. But, by all accounts, fantastic football.
And so we come to the present day then, because I can't work out a way to get through the end of the book without giving the story away and stuff. I mean, have you read the book since it's been finished?
Yeah.
What did you think? Was it better or worse than your version? And did you recorrect Paul?
Paul and I have a difference of opinion about the ending.
Yeah.
And his ending is about the future in terms of maybe having a sequel and something like that. And people will know when they get to the end of the book, there's an influence of Paul. You can see it. Historically, it's inevitable that's what Paul has stuck in there. And we talked about it. And in the end, I thought, well, yeah, why fiddle around, for the sake of it, I mean, and it can, if there was to be another book, it could be corrected, in that.
Mm-hmm. And so I know the exact line and the exact facts that you're talking about when you say that as well, because unless you're Nostradamus,
Yeah, exactly.
you would never have picked that. So present day then, the Kickstarter's raised £23,000. It needed 7,900 and something, maybe 996, I'm not sure exactly. It will be a published book. How have you felt when you've seen that Kickstarter, or how did you feel on the day when it first came out and it went whoomph through?
Well, I mean, Paul told me Kickstarter. He had to explain it to him. I said, what? People pledge money, but they don't get anything in return until there's enough money to publish, and then they'll get a copy of the book. So they basically buy it in advance, and yeah, that's the way it works. Okay. And I forgot about it, honestly, forgot all about it. And I was driving home from, I'd been to Tesco's or somewhere, and I was on Queen's Drive, and Paul rang me, and he said, have you seen the numbers? And at first I thought, what's he talking about, numbers?
Have I won the lottery?
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah, and then he said, on the Kickstarter, and I said, no, I haven't. He said, have a look when you get back. So, I looked at it, and when I got in, and it just gone through the roof, and it met its target in about 4 hours or something ridiculous. Again, mainly because Paul had put that much effort into it. His YouTube video has brought in, like 50% of all the pledges. So that was, all credit to him for that. And it's just continued to go up. And for a couple of weeks, it just went up and up and up and up. And then it sort of becalmed a little. And then Paul put another video out and kicked on again. And it's kicked on again today, I think, or yesterday. And it's just astonishing,
It's amazing, really, isn't it? And I remember reading through some of the backers can give messages and stuff like that, and I remember reading through them. It seems to have struck a chord. Certainly, the dementia angle has struck a chord with a lot of people.
I think, it's so prevalent these days. Almost everyone knows someone who's got dementia or had dementia. Or they suspect has dementia. It's that kind of a disease. And we suspected Annette had it for 2 or 3 years before we could actually get anyone to actually give us a definitive answer, and it's quite a struggle. And so I think it does affect people, and if you are affected by it, it does resonate with you. And I think you see that in the comments, people saying, yeah, this has happened to me, or this happened to my uncle, or my mother, whatever. And it's not caused a stir, but it's people have empathised with the whole thing, which is amazing.
It's incredible, really, isn't it? The love that you can receive from people from so far away as well, and hopefully the book will be published. We know, but hopefully.
Well, even I had people who, when Paul put something out on Facebook, it was his Facebook, not mine. But loads of people I knew, and some from different countries who I work with, who now live abroad or whatever, were getting in touch with them saying, oh yeah, we're sorry to hear this about your dad, and all that kind of stuff, and saying, yeah, we'll chip into this, and it was amazing. It's just quite heartwarming in a strange way, because obviously it's not a heartwarming topic, but it's heartwarming that people can be so generous about it.
No, absolutely. And then it'd be remiss of me to go through the entire video and not mention Lauren as well. What did she do for this?
Well, Lauren's got a second degree, an MA in creative writing, and she's very good at proofreading, and she did the proofreading and tried to make sure that the mistakes were found, and the typos were picked up. And we did something at the Amphi Rap, and they picked up one which was Lauren wouldn't have picked up, which was the thing is about going to London to see the semi-final at Tottenham against Southampton, and that's mentioned early on in the book, but halfway through the book it says semi-final against Tottenham, which is not something that Lauren would have picked up, and clearly we didn't pick it up when we reread it, so. Because
it was at White Hart Lane and stuff like that, of course. So
yeah.
So Lauren, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, is Paul's sister and obviously John's daughter and stuff like that. So a proper family effort, really, more than anything, isn't it?
Yeah, and also she read it and she said she thought it was very good, which was great for me because imposter syndrome has kicked in heavily,
And Lauren will tell you straight. Way.
Yeah. So it's family thing.
Does it make you proud?
It does, yeah. I'm really, really proud of certainly everything that Paul's done has astonished me. That, I remember the days when Paul would say, well, I'm going to do this thing for such and such a thing, and I'm not really sure what to charge them. And I'm thinking of charging them. I said, that you should be charging them 3 times that. And now he knows exactly, what he's worth and what is sort of power of him is amazing. I think, that sort of presence he has, which has developed over. You'll have seen it, the way he's developed that sort of presence, and he just put it to good use. For once.
Well, yeah, because the Paul that I became friends with was John from 30 years ago, who didn't finish anything.
Yeah.
And now he does.
Yeah.
So that's probably your fault.
Yeah.
He's probably watched and thought, fuck that. I'm going to finish my stuff. I'm not having it sat in a drawer for 40 years
well,
waiting.
it's a good lesson, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for him to bring back Tony Mate, if you remember that character. Yeah, that was the best one. One day that'll maybe I'll bring Tony Mate back, and we'll do it that way around. But John, listen, thank you so much. And as you mentioned,
thank you.
The man who stole the World Cup.
We should mention the artwork because
Jonny Weisberg.
It's absolutely
Is it
fantastic.
Weisberg?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the best version.
I don't think it's the finished version,
but that is astonishing.
It's incredible, isn't it? It might give some of the story away and one of the plot twists, but
maybe not.
Maybe not. Okay, John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Get involved, of course. The Kickstarter's still on until early July. I think it's July the 8th, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that.
It's around there. You'll get obviously an advanced copy. There's different tiers to it, of course. As I say, I sat down and read it in one. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. The one other theme that we've not really mentioned is hope, and hope for the future and stuff. And I think it's only, if nothing else, that is pertinent to your personal situation as well.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and hopefully you all enjoy the video and most importantly the book.